is Casey Box, and I'm the Executive Director of Land is Life. Land is Life started in 1992 as a network organization to keep Indigenous communities working on the rights of Indigenous peoples connected around the globe. And over the past 30 some odd years, we've directly supported Indigenous peoples in respect to their right to self-determination. Sure. So I always loved languages. My parents didn't take us traveling internationally that much. So I actually lied to my parents and went abroad to strengthen my language skills. And it was at that point that I went into the Amazon with a Fulbright scholar to do work on a documentary film on peoples living in voluntary isolation, a tribe that has still not been successfully contacted by the outside. And it was during that experience that I saw the overlap of both human rights and environmental rights, something that was not recognized by a lot of conservation organizations. I've worked for large conservation organizations, smaller ones, and there continues to be a failure to acknowledge the intersectionality of particular issues, whether it be women's rights, Indigenous rights, environmental rights, animal rights, etc. And that's why I genuinely feel that investing in Indigenous rights and Indigenous well-being is a great investment to touch many different social issues that exist out there. I think, working for a nonprofit, it's tough. It's there's not a lot of resources out there. That being said, the bureaucracy is very limited. You're in a very interesting place to interact not only with other NGOs and communities, but governments, multilateral organizations. So it's an interesting place to get to know many different sectors. Sure. So over the past 3 months under the lockdown of COVID-19, we've been increasingly concerned about the threats to activists around the globe, and particularly Indigenous peoples, as the illegal activity and corporations continue to try and access their lands and territories to gather some of the world's last natural resources. So in the past 3 months, we've been working with a group of Indigenous leaders over Zoom to design an Indigenous-led security fund to support community-led approaches to addressing security needs in communities and territories. Sure. So yeah, I guess feel free to stop me, Beth, if you want another example. But in recent years, we've been increasingly concerned about the security of Indigenous peoples as they reside on some of the world's last untouched natural resources. No coincidence that the majority of environmental activists killed are Indigenous peoples. So in our attempt to help better that situation, we convene Indigenous leaders across sub-Saharan Africa from 8 different countries to talk about the security realities that Indigenous communities in that region are facing, share what's working and what's not working. And then ultimately what organically came out of that process was the development of a flexible fund that would support community-led solutions to approaching security challenges. So this group right now is deploying anywhere from $500 to $3,000 directly to communities within 48 hours to invest in community-led solutions to security issues. Where does that fit in the grand scheme of things? It's a fast, flexible fund. It's not just putting out fires, but it's also investing in the mitigation of potential security issues with leaders and communities. It's something that nobody is really doing out there. We've done a market analysis of all the different rapid response funds that exist. None of them are Indigenous-led. All too often they're too bureaucratic, and the amount of money that communities actually need to respond in the short term is relatively small. So this fund has proven to be very successful and one that's been well received by Indigenous peoples in that region. And we're looking at how we might be able to replicate it in other parts of the world. As my role as the convener and connector, this is an innovative approach. It's a simple approach, but it's drastically needed. So we promoted it to different foundations, and we were invited to present this fund in front of the eighth largest foundation in the United States. So they're really interested in how this process is representative of how we can turn philanthropy upside down and maybe let grantees define what they see as impact and how they want to evaluate themselves in their work. And I think things like that and that type of change from donor to community is really exciting. Yeah, I think no matter what movement you're in, you need to recognize your role and your place in that. And so in my role at Land is Life, we look to the communities themselves for the solutions, the innovation, the approaches to complex issues that can help better the lives of communities and Indigenous rights globally. So we kind of operate as convener. Let's bring communities that are addressing these problems, living the realities, and talk about how to best address them. So in that approach, we're kind of a bottom-up organization where we say, okay, let's listen first, and then talk about how we can, put resources, the right people at the table in order to solve problems. I think, yeah, look for spaces where people can have a voice. I think there's many different tables where activists, community members should have a seat at the table and their voice should be heard. And I think this is relatively easy, again, where networks and connections become increasingly important. Having well-documented research about incidents that is going on that you feel like need to be heard. Looking for people who can help better prepare those community members or those Indigenous leaders if they get the floor at the World Bank or the United Nations or their own government, making sure that they're as informed and well prepared as possible so they can speak on behalf of their different movements.
Nice.
That's a good question. I think it's traditional convening in the sense that it's bringing people who are experienced leaders living the realities, have various different levels of experience, developing resources or tools to help communities. And I think increasingly under the constraints that we're living in, I think technology is becoming ever so more important. And I think it's made me realize that if you're supporting communities on the ground, if you're supporting organizations that already exist, that most likely will be there long after yours is, then support can continue under these constraints that we're living in. I think Land is Life has a proven model that directly supporting communities and their right to self-determination can exist into this type of climate. And I think that's the world that I'm living for, and I think Land is Life is living for, is that hopefully someday our organization might not have to exist, or it might not look like it does today, because grassroots organizations are ever so, more, their capacity is higher to operate their organizations, protect their lands and territories and the communities they serve, and that Indigenous rights globally are upheld. Yeah, that's a tough question, Beth. I think, let me just go off the cusp here for a second. I think, being mission driven is really important, but being grounded and what's your role within that mission and what you can really contribute to that movement. I think, at the end of the day, solving social issues, running nonprofits, it's hard. And at times it's not glamorous. So, really looking for people who are going to roll up their sleeves and do what it takes to support the actual mission, but you might not kind of be on the front lines yourself, and you need to be comfortable with that and support those who are actually on the front lines as they try and address these issues. Sure. I think it's very simple. Find missions that you're passionate about and reach out, ask how you can help. Be flexible, be willing to take on tasks that might not seem that glamorous, or for some reason might not seem exactly attached to the mission. At the end of the day, you know, nonprofits are strapped for resources, and they are a business at the end of the day. I think all too often people join the nonprofit sector thinking it's a charity, and that, you know, all the work is good and you go home sleeping well at night. And it is true that you sleep better than most, but at the end of the day, you have to work hard. You have to be doing, you know, whatever it takes to support the mission. I think communications is absolutely critical for this mission-driven work, especially under COVID-19, the uncertain reality of how social movements will be shaped. You know, whether marching in the streets will always be an option, we don't know. So I think being able to develop your communication skills both in person and online are critically important, as well as the development of networks. I think connections, connections, connections. And if you know that one person who can get you that protest permit or access to a donor who might be able to give you resources, I think it's critically important to have those networks. I think for me, in kind of social movements, international development, one thing that still resonates with me, you know, somebody told me this a long time ago, and of course I didn't listen to them, but before you act, just stop and listen. I think young people and people looking to get in social movements, their heart is always in the right place, but sometimes just taking a breath and taking a moment to actually listen to stakeholders, listen to people who have been involved with these movements for many, many years, can help you figure out what your role could be within that social movement. And if I had to give one additional advice, I think flexibility is probably one of the biggest traits and values that I look in people that I work with. We don't have a lot of resources. You know, Indigenous peoples on some level are the most marginalized people on the planet. The situation changes every day, and having people who have an array of skills, who are flexible, who are calm, and are willing to take different approaches to addressing a situation is really important.